We're back with Formula One again, and today we're going to be discussing how aerodynamic sophistication needs mechanical pragmatism to succeed. And with me to be discussing that is Mustafa Jinado. I'm still Afolabi. You're welcome to another Formula One show.
All right, a lot of people think that Adrian Newey is the god of engineers in F1. Nah, he ain't the god of engineers. What he is he's the god of aerodynamicists. But if you look at his season that he's having with Aston Martin now, the car looks aerodynamically great, but it's having problems with purposing, with locking out, with stability. It's not just the engine. Also, if you look at the years in which he was with Red Bull, he had Rob Marshall with him, who is the opposite of him, whereas Newey is the aerodynamic genius, the guy who makes castles out of air, or castles through the air. You had Rob Marshall coming up with the mechanical components of the car that made the car so great. And as soon as Rob Marshall left, even before Adrian Newey left, the car started to have a precipitous decline in stability and everything. And I'm going to argue that's because Rob Marshall went to McLaren and brought his anti-dive, and also not just the anti-dive, but the components from the suspension, so that the anti-dive, along with the components of the suspension, was allowing McLaren to have a stable aerodynamic platform, because the anti-dive puts an opposite force to the car when it tries to dive, and then the components there also keep that force that it does balanced and goes over the curves properly. Adrian Newey didn't have that. What he has is a stiff, peaky design, which as soon as his mechanical guy left, he started to suffer. And this is what I've been saying on this show for many years. I'm lying. I'm exaggerating. Many months, since our show's only been on for 2 years, in which Adrian Newey is not a mathematician and he's not a physicist. He's a designer. He understands how air works and can make things that are shaped properly, but he doesn't take the whole platform and the whole chassis and the whole mechanical aspect as a unity. And then whenever he comes up with his designs, he's very tyrannical with the practical engineers, people like Pierre Vacher or Rob Marshall, who are like, okay, your thing is beautiful here, but we have to make it get to conform to the real world. He'll be like, find it out yourself. So we did some research, and we're looking at the three eras that Adrian Newey was designing with. He designed with Williams, where he won 5 world titles, world constructors titles, and 4 drivers titles. I think those were the years of Senna and co. Then he was at McLaren, where he had 1 championship and 2 titles, and he was at the Red Bull, where he had 6 and 7. But those years in which he won 6 world constructors titles and 7 world titles, every step of the way, Rob Marshall was with him. And as soon as Rob Marshall left, it was all over. At McLaren, he didn't really have a mechanical guy like Rob Marshall, and he only won 1 constructors and 2 drivers championship. That was during the years of Häkkinen. And at Williams, he had a guy called Patrick Head, who was a mechanical wizard who carried him through the way. And that's when he had the most titles. 5 constructor titles and 4 drivers championships. So we've seen that when he was by himself without someone who keeps him grounded at McLaren, he only won 1 constructors and 2 world drivers. And by the way, while he was with McLaren, Rob Marshall beat him at Renault 2 years in a row, 2004 to 2005. And guess who was Rob Marshall's driver that year for Labi? Won 2 years. It was Alonso. And Alonso beat what's his name, Schumacher 2 years in a row. So the year that so during that period at which Newey was with McLaren and had a very good peaky car that had good aerodynamics, he only won 1 championship, 1 constructors, and 2 drivers with Raikkonen. Then he started losing to Ferrari and to Renault, which had Rob Marshall. Now at Williams, where he won the most, he had Patrick Head, who was a mechanical guy who dealt with the chassis and stability. So what I'm going to argue is that when Newey doesn't have a mechanical guy who can work with suspension and everything else, he doesn't do as well. And that is clearly seen with Red Bull. Like I said, when Rob Marshall left, as soon as Rob Marshall left, all of a sudden McLaren had the best balance and ride quality over curbs, over high-speed corners. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is that Rob Marshall was the one who brought the suspension geometry and the anti-dive and the anti-squat to McLaren. The years that Rob Marshall beat Adrian Newey 2 years in a row, when Rob Marshall was with Renault, he brought something called the mass damper. And the mass damper was something you put in the nose at the front of the car to do what anti-dive does. But it was made illegal after Alonso won twice, which is why Alonso left and went to McLaren, thinking that McLaren would go do well. So what we're seeing is a pattern here with Rob Marshall, in which he's always concerned with suspension, especially in the front. And when they took away the mass damper, which counteracts the forces of going on the curbs, he now made front geometry, which is basically the wishbones at a wide angle, a very steep wide angle, which does the same thing that the mass damper does, but the FIA can't ban it because the wishbones are not moving components. They said you can't have any moving mechanical components. Those are illegal. That doesn't move because it's fixed to the car. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm arguing now is that what we're seeing with Newey is the nightmare scenario in which he comes to Aston Martin and he becomes the technical director, he becomes the CEO, he becomes the team principal and has the last say. So he's not going to be listening to anybody who could counter him mechanically. And he needs somebody who can deal with mechanics. And then he's put this guy behind him, Cowell. Cowell is supposed to be working with the engines. So what happens with Newey, and I'm going to argue, is Newey is not fit to be a technical director. He's not fit to be a team principal. He's fit to be an aerodynamicist. And you have to have a team of people who can counter him. When he was with Red Bull, they had Pierre Vacher, who's a very practical, or he's good with setups for cars. And then you have Rob Marshall with Red Bull, who gave them the great suspension and everything. Then as soon as he left, even though Red Bull tried to copy his anti-dive, they didn't have the last component which he brought, which was the carbon fiber materials, which acts as a balance between the anti-dive and the dive itself. You know, there's a third part. So you have the anti-dive and you have the dive. Then you have the carbon components, which is basically chemical, which balances off everything. So I guess all I'm saying is that stop giving so much hype to Adrian Newey. We need to be giving the hype to Rob Marshall. Rob Marshall is straight up the best engineer in F1. And the proof is in the pudding, because it's not about the drivers at McLaren, it's about the car. And not only that, it's not about the top speed of McLaren. It's not about how fast it goes over high-speed corners. It's about its tire deck and its ride quality and its balance and stability over curbs, all of which are due to the mechanical genius of Rob Marshall. Thank you. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're spot on there. You're correct. I mean, Rob Marshall, I think it was in 2006, he joined Red Bull. The same year Adrian arrived, and you could see that the bold designs of Adrian Newey needed a mechanical anchor for them to become a reality. You know, Adrian Newey is such a bold, extravagant kind of aerodynamic purist who wants everything to be, perfect. But most of those designs only end up on the drawing board. The mechanical reality often is being brought to life when he has a mechanical partner of the genius of the type of a Rob Marshall. And we saw that quite clearly.
And the other guy, Paul Head.
Patrick Head. So we saw that quite clearly in the Red Bull years, where Rob Marshall's genius actually, what he was doing with Adrian Newey wasn't to really push back on Adrian Newey's talent and designing prowess. What he did was to find solutions to make his designs more mechanically viable. And so what he did was sort of accentuate Newey's aerodynamic genius by finding solutions to where the flaws were. And it basically brought out the two dynamic drawings and made them three dynamic drawings, So basically
basically put them in the 3D world of everything.
Put them in
friction, bumps, everything.
He brought the sketches out onto the track, basically. He brought the sketches out onto the track, in spite of the fact that those things were so bold. And if you look at Adrian Newey's design template, or I dare say concept, he likes cars that are tightly packed. In fact, they said in the early years of his designing, the drivers found it very difficult to actually enter into the cockpit. So it was a design concept that he had been, growing with. So people that worked with him had to do a lot of adjustments, maneuver the suspension, do a lot of things to ensure that these bold, pointy, fronty kind of cars were able to go on the road without being fragile. Because the main problem with
these cars are stiff and non-compliant.
Non-compliant. So basically, most of his designs were very, very exotic, and more purist, but practically they were fragile. A lot of them were, they were overheating because a lot of components were too tightly packed. So basically, the genius of Rob Marshall was able to look at, the design and bring it out into reality. And so without Rob Marshall, in the McLaren days, it was difficult. I say it was the loneliest period of his career. I think he won only once, I guess. I'm not quite sure.
He won one constructors and two drivers.
Okay,
and that was a year where he had a car that was absolutely brittle. It had very high performances, but it was very unreliable, overheating and problems like that. And it's funny that the year he left.
Yeah, that was the year Marshall was actually a Renault. And
his name was winning.
Yeah.
That was the 2 years that Alonso won because he had the mass damper, which is the mechanical.
Was basically by
and he had Patrick Head at Williams. So you see that if you look at Williams and Red Bull, where he won tons and tons of constructors and drivers, he had someone who was mechanically minded. And also, I want to start giving credit to Pierre Vacher because Pierre Vacher was actually the chief technical director of that team under Newey, and Pierre Vacher is actually even more practical than. So what I'm saying is that he's more practical than even Rob Marshall, because what Rob Marshall does is he's a suspension and mechanical genius, right? Newey is a aerodynamic, but what's his name is almost practical, like a mechanic. Pierre Vacher. So Pierre Vacher was saying that is actually looking for balance in the design, and now that Newey is gone, you see it in the car this year with Red Bull, where it's not too peaky. Also, it doesn't have too much. It's not too much on downforce either, and the focus is on the software and the way that Verstappen drives. All of that determines how the shape of the car is made and how everything is balanced. So actually, Vacher was actually the head administrating over Newey and what's his name, Rob Marshall. And I don't think Newey liked that. But I think you need to have someone like Vacher who just is looking for equanimity. He's looking for overall balance without having any extreme.
And I think
extreme.
And I think the influence of Vacher, like you rightly mentioned, is similar to what Patrick Head was doing at Williams at that time. His approach was different from Rob Marshall in that he actually pushed back on a lot of bold designs to ensure that there was balance and that the car was more mechanically viable. So they could, equilibrium, they could reach a compromise.
And that was the perfect team that you would have, because you have the one person who
team, basically. It was like
and then you have the superstars. But during that, but Newey wanted shares. He wanted to be the man, so he got what he wanted. He has a Batmobile at Aston Martin, whose top speed is 100 kilometers. It's more like a bat kite. It's a kite. That shit is slow, and you know why it's slow? Because number one, it doesn't have. He didn't focus on the engine. He put Kawa back, but also all of this aerodynamic and this peakiness, it doesn't mean anything if you're not addressing suspension and stuff. Because we saw how many times Aston Martin was locking out on corners and stuff like that and curves.
I mean, look at the number of laps they were able to record. That's ridiculous.
No, I'm gonna keep it real. Newey believes he's God, and you can't tell God. You can't correct God.
Yeah.
You can correct Rob Marshall. You can even correct Vacher. Remember last year when Vacher told Verstappen, "There's no way you can enter that corner if you cut your front wing." And Verstappen said, "Oh yeah, let me do it. I will show you." Remember that when I think it was it was high speed. I want to say it was Monza. They clipped the front wing, and Vacher told Verstappen, "There's no way it can happen." But he listened to Verstappen. If that had been Newey, he would "Shut up, I'm the boss." You get my point. So you have to have some humility. Yeah,
you have to absolutely. Yeah. And I dare say, leaving Red Bull now, Red Bull seems to have a balanced team. They don't have someone as exotic as Adrian Newey, purists like Adrian Newey, but they have people who can balance themselves out. And I think,
even their boss, Lauren McKee, is also quiet.
He's also quiet, exactly. Yeah. I think that was the guy that came from Racing Bulls.
Yeah, Racing Bulls. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the problem with Aston now is that Newey has total control, absolute control. There's no Patrick Head to check his excesses. There's no Rob Marshall to try and work out how viable his beautiful designs are. And so with the early signs, with the number of laps they recorded and the overheating problem and all the issues, the signs are not good. And it validates your theory that everywhere he has succeeded, he's had a mechanical anchor to make his designs successful, basically.
Yeah. That's it. But oh no, he's the Wizard of Oz. He can't tolerate. He's Yahweh. Yeah. Yahweh on the mountain. How dare you tell me what to do?
The aerodynamic genius.
This guy has ruined Alonso's career. This was supposed to be the year Alonso win the championship. Sure. Alonso has been doing his work, and Newey comes with this rubbish, man. Let me calm down, because I still think that car will do better. But we're just trying to say you need a team with people who are balanced. Mm-hmm. And now when you're looking at Red Bull they're looking for equilibrium. They're understated, but their main thing now is that their software is driven around the way that Verstappen drives. So to be honest with you, Verstappen is actually the chief engineer, chief aerodynamicist, and the chief software developer of Red Bull, because they know that he is their man. And in this age of AI can build the perfect car around Verstappen. And I don't think realize this. Red Bull didn't need Newey. They didn't even need Rob Marshall. What they need is Verstappen. He is, and it's not just the way he drives. The way he drives now in an AI environment, AI can create the car and show you everything based on his drive. But not all drivers can do that, because that means that Verstappen knows the car inside out. Remember we said he's like a mechanic, an engineer, and a racer at the same time. Because if you give it to Lewis Hamilton, AI couldn't make an efficient car with Lewis Hamilton because his driving style isn't efficient. The closest is maybe George Russell, but the problem with Russell is that he's efficient, but he doesn't have the same throttle skill as Verstappen. What were you going to say?
Yeah, what I wanted to say was Newey only thrives when the rules change purely on shape or aerodynamics. Yeah, so he struggles when there's a rule change on engine, propulsion. Engines need space and they need to be cooled properly. Yeah. So that's when the problem gets there. But when it's a shape or aerodynamic adjustment, he thrives. But it doesn't look good, right? Yeah.
And even with McLaren, the years that he won with McLaren, he was using some sort of dodgy traction control or something like, or with Williams, he was using traction control. So he is always some, and even remember when Verstappen, to this day, I believe it, they took away that asymmetric valve, and that's when the Red Bull fell. Remember last year? I think he was covering it up with his asymmetric valve. All right, man, we nailed this one, motherfucker. Yeah. We nailed this shit. I'm not going to say any names. I'm learning, they say keep your mouth shut, right? Yeah. Okay. Sure. Last thoughts in general. What do you think? And then you can take us out.
Yeah, the 2026 Aston Martin project currently looks like one of Adrian Newey's failed McLaren project, particularly the MP418 car. It's an aerodynamic masterpiece that cannot function as a
No, this year is the ASMR 26. You're thinking about the old McLaren.
No, I'm saying the design looks like...
Oh, it looks like it. Okay, yeah.
Yes, I'm comparing it to an old design. So, an aerodynamic masterpiece that cannot function as a mechanical object. It's the strongest, possible confirmation that Newey needs a Rob Marshall-esque figure. To turn his brilliant ideas to reliable monster machines. So basically, without that kind of figure, it looks very dire. Even during the early stage of the season, it looks very dire for Aston Martin.
Aston Martin can still save their season if they hire you as their...
Yeah, but even if everything went right, Mustafa, we are not expecting them to turn heads. It was a tipping stage.
They can hire you as the technical director. I'm serious, because you get more common sense than that guy, and I can be the theorist. I'm just kidding. All right, take us out of all of it.
Yeah, it's been another brilliant Formula One show. I've been discussing the brilliant theory that Adrian Newey needs a mechanical anchor to succeed in any of his design. And now that he's at Aston Martin, that he doesn't have one, we don't know what is going to happen. And from Mustafa and myself, we'll be back again tomorrow for another Formula One show.
Nice one. Turn it off before I start talking.